They trained us to look for killers in the wrong places, in wars, in rebellions, in poisoned goblets passed across candlelit tables. But Isabella did not die because someone hated her. She died because everyone admired her. Isabella did not fall on a battlefield. She did not lose her head to a mob. She did not drink from a cup meant for another. She died slowly, quietly, every single morning. Picture the ritual. A young queen stands before a polished mirror as servants wait in silence. Light from a narrow window touches her face. She lifts her hand and spreads a pale paste across her skin, layer after layer, until every trace of color disappears. The court calls it refinement, purity, power made visible. No one calls it what it is: poison. This is Isabella of Bavaria, Queen of France, wife of King Charles VI, a woman placed at the heart of one of Europe's most fragile crowns. In her world, beauty is not vanity, it is law. Pale skin is not fashion, it is authority. White means untouched by labor, untouched by dirt, untouched by the common world. White means divine favor. And so Isabella applies the mask again, not because she wants to, but because she must. If she stops, whispers begin. If she fades, influence fades with her. If she ages, power follows. In a court where appearance decides survival, the face becomes a battlefield. Every crack in the makeup is a threat. Every imperfection is weakness, and weakness is not forgiven. The cruelest part is this: no one forces her hand. The mirror does. The standard does. The unspoken rule that says a queen must be flawless, even if it kills her. So the ritual repeats, day after day, year after year. The poison seeps in, invisible, patient, merciless, not delivered by an assassin, but by tradition, not hidden in shadows, but praised as elegance. If beauty is the unwritten law of power, who would dare to break it? And if obedience looks identical to self-destruction, how would history ever tell the difference? This is only the beginning. If you want to understand how a simple beauty ritual helped destroy a queen, a family, and a kingdom, subscribe to the channel now. The story only gets darker from here. To understand Isabella's choices, you must first understand her world. In the medieval court, beauty was never personal. It was political language. A face spoke before a woman ever did, and pale skin spoke the loudest. White skin was not considered attractive by chance. It was a signal. It meant divine favor. It meant distance from labor, from soil, from hunger. It marked bloodlines that ruled rather than served. In a society obsessed with hierarchy, skin color became proof of belonging at the top. For a queen, this was not fashion, it was legitimacy. Isabella did not paint her face because she enjoyed it. She did it because the court was watching, because every ambassador measured her worth in glances, because every noblewoman waited for the first sign of weakness, because a queen who looked tired, aging, or flawed invited rumors before she invited respect, and rumors were dangerous. In royal politics, perception was power. A queen who appeared fragile was assumed to be weak. A queen who looked ordinary was treated as replaceable, and a queen who lost influence lost protection. There was no space for authenticity. There was only performance. Every morning, Isabella stepped into a system that punished deviation. If she refused the standards, she would not be praised for courage. She would be erased. Her voice in council would soften. Her presence would shrink. Her role would become ceremonial, then invisible. This is the part history often forgets. Cosmetics were not a personal indulgence. They were a requirement, a silent contract between the crown and the court. As long as she embodied perfection, she remained useful. As long as she remained useful, she survived. Beauty was armor, but it was armor that slowly cut into the flesh. The pressure did not come from one person. It came from everyone. Ladies in waiting, courtiers, foreign observers, even allies. All of them reinforced the same message without ever saying it aloud. A queen must not age. A queen must not fade. A queen must not appear human. Isabella learned early that her body was not her own. It belonged to the crown. Her face became a public surface on which power was projected. To maintain that projection, sacrifice was expected, and sacrifice was normalized. If her skin burned, it was endurance. If her health declined, it was duty. If something felt wrong, it was dismissed as weakness. The court rewarded compliance, not caution. So Isabella continued, not blindly, but knowingly. She chose what seemed like the only option available. To step away from the standard was to step away from influence. And for a queen, losing influence was more dangerous than losing comfort. This is where judgment becomes easy and understanding becomes difficult. She did not cling to beauty out of vanity. She clung to it because it was the last thing keeping her relevant in a world that devoured women who aged. Before the collapse, before the scandal, before history sharpened its knives, there was simply a woman doing what survival demanded. And survival, in that court, came at a terrible cost. What looked like beauty was discipline. Every application followed an unspoken code. The paste had to be thick, white beyond nature, smooth enough to hide pores, scars, fatigue. Once applied, it was not allowed to crack, not allowed to run, not allowed to reveal the skin beneath. A perfect mask meant control. An imperfect one meant failure. This was not makeup. It was a ritual of power. Servants prepared the mixture carefully. The consistency mattered. Too thin, and it would betray movement. Too heavy, and it would stiffen into something almost sculptural. When it dried, the face became expressionless, untouchable, almost inhuman. Exactly as a queen was expected to appear. What no one said aloud was what the mixture truly contained. Lead, mercury, metal powders ground so fine they dissolved into the skin. These substances did not stain, they penetrated. Day after day, the toxins passed through the pores, into the bloodstream, toward the brain. There was no sudden collapse, no dramatic warning, only accumulation. Silent, patient, irreversible. This is what made the ritual so cruel. The damage did not appear immediately. At first, the skin seemed brighter, smoother, more flawless than before. The poison rewarded obedience with the illusion of improvement, and that illusion demanded repetition. The longer it was used, the harder it became to stop. The metals damaged the skin beneath the mask. Natural color faded, texture worsened, sensitivity increased. But these changes only reinforced the dependence. As the face beneath deteriorated, the mask had to become thicker, whiter, more severe. A trap closed by design. Stopping was not an option. A queen who suddenly appeared with discoloration or blotched skin would invite suspicion, questions, rumors. In a court that consumed weakness, exposure was dangerous. So the ritual continued. Morning after morning, the face was erased and replaced with authority. Evening after evening, the skin beneath paid the price. The poison worked slowly, precisely, without mercy. No one called it harm, they called it maintenance. Physicians of the time praised such substances. They believed metal cleansed the body, that it purified, that it strengthened. When irritation appeared, it was explained away. When pain followed, it was minimized. When symptoms worsened, the solution was never less of the substance. It was more coverage, more correction, more poison. This is how the loop became unbreakable. The ritual demanded perfection. The poison created imperfection. And imperfection demanded more ritual. There was no villain hiding in the shadows, no assassin slipping powder into a cup. The threat stood openly on a dressing table, praised by custom and protected by ignorance. By the time the body began to react, it was already too late. What was worshipped as beauty had become a slow execution. And the most terrifying part is this. Everyone involved believed they were preserving her. In reality, they were watching a queen disappear beneath a mask that could never be removed. The fracture did not begin with her. It began in the summer of 1392. That year, King Charles VI of France suffered his first severe mental breakdown. Not a rumor, not a moment of weakness. A complete and terrifying collapse that the court could no longer hide. He failed to recognize his own wife. He failed to recognize his children. He attacked his own attendants in sudden fits of violence. He was consumed by panic and delusion. At times, he believed his body was made of glass, that a single touch could shatter him into pieces. Servants were ordered to keep their distance. Clothing was reinforced. Movement itself became a threat. This was not madness that came and went. It returned again and again, each episode stripping away more of the man who wore the crown. From that moment on, France entered a dangerous illusion. There was still a king. There was still a throne. There were still ceremonies, seals, and declarations. But there was no ruler capable of ruling. The crown remained intact. The mind beneath it did not. And power, like water, flowed to where it could be held. Only then does Isabella return to the center of the story. In a court suddenly led by uncertainty, decisions could not wait. Wars did not pause for illness. Alliances did not soften out of sympathy. The machinery of the state demanded direction, even if the man meant to provide it could no longer understand the world around him. So responsibility shifted, gradually at first, quietly, almost politely. Councils looked to Isabella for stability. Diplomats measured her reactions instead of the king's. Documents passed through her hands before they ever reached his name. What began as support became dependence. She did not seize control. Control arrived and refused to leave. And this is where the tragedy deepens. As the king's mind fractured in public, Isabella's began to erode in silence. The poison she had worn for years did not announce itself. It did not cause spectacle. It worked beneath the surface, dulling perception, distorting judgment, thinning emotional boundaries. Two centers of power were failing at the same time, in different ways, and for different reasons. One collapse was visible and feared. The other was invisible and trusted. The court knew the king was unwell. They adjusted around it. They compensated. They protected appearances. No one suspected that the woman holding the kingdom together was herself beginning to come apart. Stress was blamed. Pressure was blamed. Ambition was blamed. Any explanation was easier than the truth. Because if Isabella was also failing, then there was no one left. This is the moment history rarely pauses to examine. Not a single villain, not a single mistake, but a system balanced on two damaged minds, pretending stability through ritual and denial. France still functioned. Orders were given, treaties were negotiated, the illusion held. But beneath it, reason was weakening, judgment was bending, and the cost of that decay had not yet revealed itself. When power survives without clarity, disaster does not arrive loudly. It waits. History judges Isabella most harshly as a mother. Not because she had no children, she had many, but because something in her seemed to vanish as they suffered. Illness passed through the royal household. Children weakened, some died young, as was common in that era. But what unsettled observers was not the loss itself, it was the absence of reaction. No public grief, no visible hesitation, no maternal collapse that people expected from a queen who was also a woman. When political necessity demanded sacrifice, Isabella did not resist. When alliances required distance from her own blood, she complied. When decisions harmed her children indirectly or directly, she did not flinch. To later generations, this was unforgivable. They called her heartless. They called her monstrous. They called her a mother who chose power over blood. But this judgment ignores what was happening beneath the surface. Mercury does not only damage the skin, it does not stop at tremors or confusion. It attacks the brain itself, especially the regions responsible for emotional regulation, empathy, attachment, and fear response. The very systems that allow a mother to feel connection begin to fail. This is the cruelty of neurological poisoning. It does not erase intelligence overnight. It erodes feeling first. It blunts instinct. It disconnects emotion from consequence. Isabella did not stop understanding what was happening. She stopped feeling it. Pain became distant. Loss became abstract. Human suffering turned into information to be processed, not emotion to be endured. From the outside, she appeared cold, calculating, unmoved. From the inside, something far worse was happening. The capacity to feel was shutting down. This is the moment where morality becomes unstable. If a person no longer experiences empathy as others do, can their choices be judged by the same standards? If the brain responsible for attachment has been damaged by years of poisoning, where does responsibility end and tragedy begin? Isabella did not wake up one day and decide to abandon her children emotionally. There was no declaration, no visible turning point. There was only a gradual narrowing of feeling. What once hurt deeply began to register faintly. What once demanded hesitation became procedural. What once required tears became routine. The court interpreted this as strength. They praised her composure. They admired her resolve. They mistook neurological damage for political discipline. And Isabella herself may not have understood what she was losing. When the mind is compromised in this way, the absence of emotion does not feel like loss. It feels like clarity, like relief from pain, like control. That illusion is devastating. By the time history began sharpening its accusations, the woman it judged was no longer fully capable of defending herself emotionally. She could make decisions, she could speak, she could rule, but she could not feel what others felt. This is the gray zone history refuses to sit with. A mother who failed her children, a queen who acted without mercy, a woman whose brain had been quietly dismantled long before the consequences were visible. Condemnation is easy, understanding is far more uncomfortable. And the most unsettling truth is this: the very qualities that allowed Isabella to keep ruling were the same qualities that made her seem inhuman. not because she chose to be, but because something inside her had already gone silent. History records the Treaty of Troy as a document, ink on parchment, dates, names, clauses. But the truth did not feel like history when it happened. It felt like a private moment stretched thin by fear. The room was quiet, too quiet for a decision of this weight. Courtiers stood at a careful distance. No one rushed her. No one questioned her. The silence itself carried expectation. Isabella sat at the table. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Not because it was ornate, but because everything it represented pressed down on her hand. Years of war, a fractured crown, a king who could no longer rule, a kingdom exhausted by uncertainty. This was not framed as betrayal. It was framed as order. She was told this treaty would stabilize France, that it would end chaos, that it would protect what remained of the realm. She was told that resistance would mean endless bloodshed, and that compromise was wisdom. And in that moment, it made sense. The Treaty of Troyes stripped her own son of his claim to the throne and transferred the future of France to its enemy. A single act that overturned generations of succession and reshaped the fate of a nation. But Isabella did not experience this as treason. She experienced it as containment. When judgment deteriorates, decisions no longer feel catastrophic. They feel necessary. When the brain is compromised, complexity collapses into urgency. Long-term consequences blur. Immediate relief takes priority. The pen touched the page. Her hand trembled, but not with doubt, with strain, with fatigue, with a body that had endured too much for too long. This is the uncomfortable truth history avoids. The treaty was not signed in a moment of rage or cruelty. It was signed in a moment of distorted logic, a moment where the future seemed less real than the pressure to make the present stop hurting. Those watching saw calculation. Those reading later saw treachery. But what if the decision came from a mind no longer capable of weighing reality as it once had? Mercury poisoning does not erase intelligence overnight. It warps judgment. It narrows focus. It creates false clarity. A person can appear decisive while losing the ability to grasp consequence. In that state, surrender can feel like strategy. Abdication can feel like protection. Destruction can feel like control. When the treaty was sealed, there was no dramatic reaction, no collapse, no visible regret, only relief. Relief that the decision was made. Relief that the noise might finally stop. France did not fall in a single battle. It shifted in a single moment. A moment defined not by hatred, but by exhaustion and neurological decay. This is how empires truly fall. Not always through invasion, not always through betrayal. Sometimes through a quiet signature made by someone who believed they were saving what little order remained. And by the time the consequences became undeniable, the damage was already written in ink. Isabella did not die in triumph. She did not die surrounded by gratitude. She did not die remembered as a woman who held a kingdom together while it was tearing itself apart. She died alone. When Isabella of Bavaria died in 1435, she was 65 years old, an age that suggests longevity, but hides a far crueler truth. She had lived long enough to watch her reputation rot, long enough to see her name turn into a curse, long enough to be judged before her body finally gave out. There was no grand ceremony, no attempt at reconciliation, no final gesture of mercy. Even her own son did not come to see her one last time. By then, history had already made its decision. History does not pause at sickbeds. It does not ask what happened inside a mind before it condemns the hand that acted. It looks only at outcomes, and Isabella's outcome was unforgivable. Her name was reduced to a verdict: traitor. No footnotes, no conditions, no hesitation. The woman who survived an impossible court, an absent king, endless war, and decades of slow neurological decay was flattened into a single word. Context vanished. Suffering disappeared. Only the damage remained. This is how history prefers its villains: simple, contained, convenient. It is easier to hate a queen than to confront the system that demanded her perfection. Easier to condemn her decisions than to admit how much they depended on a mind already compromised. Easier to call her evil than to face the idea that power can continue operating even when those holding it are no longer whole. Isabella never stood trial. She was never given the chance to explain herself. And perhaps she could not have explained it even if she wanted to. How do you defend choices made while your body was quietly dismantling your ability to feel, to judge, to hesitate? How do you argue against centuries of outrage when your crime fits too neatly into the story people want to believe? History does not wait for science. It does not revise its verdicts when new understanding emerges. It prefers clean narratives over uncomfortable truths. And so Isabella remains frozen in time. A warning, a symbol, a name spoken with disdain. But beneath that label is a question history rarely asks. How many people have been condemned for actions shaped by forces their era could not name? How many lives were ruined not by malice, but by ignorance? How many so-called monsters were simply human beings slowly destroyed from the inside? Some people are judged for centuries not because they were uniquely cruel, but because they lived in a time that had no language for the poison that killed them. If you want more stories that expose the darker truths behind royal power, hidden illness, and history's most misunderstood figures, subscribe to the channel. This is where we look behind the crown and refuse to look away.